Yep, we're rolling.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Security Noise. This is the start of Cybersecurity Awareness Month 2025. That is October. I don't actually know when October became Cybersecurity Awareness Month or how long that's been a thing, but we're doing an episode about it, so you know that's how prepared we are here. We are joined by TrustedSec's Director of Advisory Solutions to talk trends, ideas, and fun. Before we begin, I do want to give shout out to our Discord server. That is discord.gg/TrustedSec. If you want to join the show potentially or contribute ideas, give Skylar a shout out there. All right. Before we get into things, we'll do kind of the recent InfoSec story that has been buzzing about, and that of course is the Jaguar Land Rover hack. It looks like it was, lapsus. That is of course a sort of loosely organized, anonymous type group of people that seem to be generally out to make trouble rather than your typical ransomware actor, supposedly. At least is who's claiming responsibility currently. It has shut down the organization now for quite some time, at least better than a week. Obviously that's costing them lots of money. It seems to be a full production shutdown that this has forced them into. And so far, seems to be rather challenging process to do recovery. We're now at the point of the British government, or the UK government rather, looking at some potential bailouts and extraordinary support for different parts of the supply chain there. And that's kind of where we are with that. The story, of course, is still developing. I'm a little bit amazed by this. Alex and I were chatting before the show that, such a large organization doesn't at least have more disaster recovery capability. But I'll let him jump in on that real briefly and share some of his thoughts there.
No, we were chatting about that. I would say I'm less surprised. I think, if you look at the company, they've been in the news anyway for a lot of other challenges. Partially not being able to make cars people want to buy. And so I think when you look at organizations, they make a lot of bad decisions in a lot of places, right? So if you're not able to make good marketing decisions or product decisions or what have you, it sounds like it's any surprise that maybe some of the IT processes were lacking here. I think that, it's interesting because you look at a lot of the breaches that happen, and they're the ones that are in the news, right? I mean, there are lots that aren't in the news, but the ones that are in the news tend to be household names. And you always think, why weren't they doing certain things? These are big companies, and, it's pretty common that they're not. And I think the other thing that this really highlights is for years, right, when we talked about, information security or cybersecurity, we always talked about breaches and the number of records that were lost and the fines and everything like that. We're really, over the past few years, it's just continued to grow where the conversation is really about availability. It's a much different issue for an organization to lose customer records. As bad as that is, sometimes ensure their way out of it or pay the fines. But losing production is a much different thing, right? I mean, when your business is predicated on building cars and you can't build cars, you've got a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess for me, though, I just look at it from a perspective of, I've tested a lot of software. You're going to get breached. I mean, there's just so many holes, and so much of the stuff has built up over so much time that, it's impossible, especially with a threat actor that's, willing to allow some dwell time and see how far they can get before they, pull the trigger and try to get that ransom and get out of there tactic. But if you have somebody who is like a lapsus that's just kind of in it for the lulz and the street cred and stuff like that, and, wants to make the impact as big as possible, it's you're gonna get hurt, and it could happen to anybody. And I really believe all those things are true. But disaster recovery, I mean, I look at that as it's not the science that necessarily defense is. It really just takes money. It takes having the standby systems. It takes having the backups and enough generations of backups that you can roll to some point before there was a problem, and the ability to restore those things quickly and the people on staff to know how to do it. If you've got those things, you can recover. And it is a little bit surprising that public companies that, have to publish, risks and stuff to shareholders and stuff, don't have a little bit better handle on this at times.
I would argue a little bit, though, that I think when you talk about, DR has obviously changed, right? I mean, we were doing this, we've been around a long time, it was having the spare equipment and being able to restore the backups and things like that. But a lot of this, it's not like, they need to rebuild some database somewhere, right? And just redirect their applications. I mean, when you have these kind of complicated, oftentimes in these production environments, and I mean production of things, right? I don't mean production versus test. A lot of these things were never designed to be online. They have things added to them. It's kind of these kind of rickety connections between a lot of this equipment and a lot of manufacturing environments. And so rebuilding it and putting it all back together, I think is not as simple as what we think of as kind of an old school DR situation where we're running out and swapping things out and rebuilding from backups.
Well, sure. I mean, it's not just restore the database. It's restore the database and replay all the transactions because you got to match the number of parts that are in the bin and all of those things. I agree. It's non-trivial, but if you know how the enterprise actually operates, you should be able to do it.
For many reasons.
All right. Well, anyway, that was this week in InfoSec. We are going to drift to our main topic now, and that, of course, is Security Awareness Month. So some of the things that I thought we'd start out talking about is password authentication, FIDO, WebAuthn. Those have all been major trends lately as far as both adoption on the organization side and maybe on the personal side as far as individuals needing to use keys and stuff to authenticate to their banks and websites. So, one thing that I think is probably really time to do in a lot of organizations is do that cybersecurity awareness training, but it might be as simple as teaching people this is what it means to have a device key. I think that's a good conversation to probably start having internally with your employees. Alex, just nodding in agreement. No further comments.
It's when it comes to kind of Cybersecurity Awareness Month and training, I think training gets a bad rap just because so much of it is so awful. And when people kind of talk about training in corporate environments, it's these videos that look like it just stock videos and with kind of strangely ambiguous advice that feels like common sense, but a lot of it's not even necessarily correct. And I think it just gets a bad rap. And I think my view is people want to do the right thing. And so I think, training really needs to be based on what can happen, right? I think people just aren't aware. And even outside of organizations or corporations, if you just read the news, especially like the local news, and see what people are falling for, right? Whether it's romance scams or all these crypto scams and invoice fraud in people's personal lives, those are really the same things that are leading to a lot of incidents in corporations and organizations. So I think the more that kind of employee training is not just 1 month, but it's ongoing, but really focuses on the actual issues that are catching people, because I really think they're pretty similar, in your work life and your personal life.
Yeah, but I think some of the reason a lot of those videos are so bad and people get so tired of them is they don't really educate, right? They just tell you, oh, don't click this email, don't, watch out for this kind of stuff, and it's not new information. It's not helping them understand what they can do, really. It's all a bunch of, do nots that are not really helpful. Whereas I think, actually explain to somebody, a little bit about how a YubiKey works, what it means that their cell phone is their authentication device, or Windows Hello, actually giving them some knowledge about, well, in addition, you're authenticating the device, and then your possession of the device, is authenticating with the server. It gets a challenge. It sends it, back. And I mean, you don't have to get into all the cryptographic details, but you could at least show them the high level exchange and stuff. And I think that would help a lot of people kind of understand the situation and think intelligently about what people are asking them to do. So, when that threat actor is saying, can you just hold your cell phone near your computer within Bluetooth range and, for me, that might get them thinking, wait a minute, something is wrong here. So do you think maybe we should actually put more technical education into some of this stuff?
That should be part of it. As I said, I really think, though, it's tough because, like you said, I mean, the advice for years has been don't click things. Well, I mean, in most modern offices, that's your job. I mean, people's job is to click things. It's to open attachments. And so I think really, focusing on the methodologies, but I think you're exactly right, the why. So here's what an attacker wants you to do and why. Here's how the tool we're giving you can help prevent that. I think that's absolutely can be an important part of the training.
Well, I do think this is coming home, so to speak, too. I mean, MFA has pretty well captured the enterprise market, but now you can do it with your Google account. Your bank probably offers some of this, and, for a while that's been SMS messages and stuff, and people are pretty comfortable with that. But when it comes to things like FIDO keys and, or using your cell phone as that authenticator, people, I think, do need to plan a little bit about it. What happens if I lose my keys? How do I register additional keys? Should I register additional keys with the sites I'm using? And again, I don't think a lot of people have a really clean concept on how this stuff works. And so if you are that person that gets it, that's a conversation to have with your friends and family, I think. And it may be that Cybersecurity Awareness Month is actually the right opportunity to do that. Kitschy and campy as it seems.
Well, when are we going to start seeing, PSA ads? Have you talked to your family about YubiKeys?
About Fido today?
About Fido, yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe we should. Although, with the government shutdown, I guess CISA won't be doing it. There's that. Nothing, Alex?
Man, he's being a good boy today.
No, I do. No, I think it's obviously incumbent on us to help our family and our friends and everything else. But I don't know. It's a tough one. Just because I think, to choose my words carefully, people are oftentimes easy to trick, right? And you never want to blame victims. But the fact of the matter is, all you have to do is go on any social media site and find a news organization and look for an article about someone that fell for a scam or was, compromised, and read the comments. They're always brutal. And so I think that, making sure that people really just understand to report anything unusual, how to recognize things that are unusual, and really understand that they're the target are very important things. But I really, my big thing focusing on, the types of things that will compromise your organization are the same things that are going to compromise your personal bank account.
True. I'm even just talking, though, from an availability standpoint again, right? I mean, if you flip the MFA on your bank and you decide to use Windows Hello as your authentication mechanism, what happens if, your 4-year-old runs into the room and pours a hot cup of coffee on top of your laptop? What are you going to do? Do you know how to get back in? Do you have another key registered somewhere? I think people need to think about these things because, passwords we've gone over and people kind of have come to grips with which ones they should and shouldn't write down and where they should write them down and all of those things. But we're to a point where I think we have to kind of do it again with some of these new technologies.
What's the most annoying part of getting a new phone, right? Aside from the fact that charging technology changes every 6 months, it's always your authenticator apps.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, when you get a new phone, it's like, you restore from your backup. Everything else works except your authenticator apps. And I think, and people don't it's always like past you is always the biggest enemy of current you, or current me is always the biggest enemy of future me. And it's like, hey, you're setting up this new thing. Make sure you print out or store safely these recovery keys.
Right.
Maybe if I need those, it'll be in a year and I'll figure it out then. Right. I mean, it's just, and if you do print them out, where do you put them? Right. So I think that, yes, I think that people are always going to be a bit of a roadblock, and it's challenging.
You mean you don't screenshot them and just keep them on your phone the whole time?
The number of people that will tell you that everything is in their notes on their phone. That's like, when I do when I do these trainings, I mean, that's one of the most common comments. Oh, you mean I shouldn't have all my passwords in my notes?
I have some very close family that do that.
Yeah, we all do.
Go back to that TXT file on my desktop. All right. Well, how about IoT? That's a topic we return to a lot on this show, but it's also one to think about for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And some of the things that I was thinking about on that score was, we've said in the past, nobody really segments their home network and stuff like that, but I think that's actually changing. Things like Ubiquity and stuff are relatively affordable. You can buy some of this equipment off the shelf and it actually supports doing that. So that's maybe another thing that, people who are a little bit more in the know could probably lead their friends and family in the direction of doing. Skylar, Alex, do you guys think that's worth it?
Absolutely. So a friend of mine got me onto network segmentation, and I try to spread the gospel thereof as much as I can. But like Ubiquity, like you said, is one of the better like consumer based networking appliances you can get. I also like I think it's on the cheaper scale, but the Firewalla products started off as a Kickstarter, and now it's just kind of in semi-mass production.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should say that while this stuff has gotten available and probably manageable for someone who isn't an IT professional, it's still not 100% cheap. Because correct me if I'm wrong, even that low end firewall is what, couple $200.
Yep, and if you get mid-grade, you're looking around 500. So
I think a lot of households would still have to make a decision. Do I really have enough IoT devices? Am I putting enough gadgets that I have lower trust in on the network to justify going that route?
I would strongly suggest if you're not sure how many devices, or if you think you know how many devices are on your network, just download like the Fing app Fing, and just run a quickie scan on your Wi-Fi and just see how many devices are truly on there, because sometimes you forget about the light bulbs that connect to your robot ladies, echoes, and then how many echoes or how many Google Homes do you have? You got all these speakers things that are listening to you and connected to Wi-Fi, your watches, your phones, your tablets, your TVs now. So if you really want to just see like, oh, why is the Wi-Fi slow today? Download Fing and just run a quick scan and see how many devices are actually running on your network.
And I think it's if you have kids, like those stupid LED lights they have everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like every single thing you buy now comes with an app, and everything's connected. And your fridge is on there, and the dryer, and the washing machine, right? And like, I mean, I don't get a notification on my phone when my dishwasher's finished. And for us, I'm a huge believer in wires. So people always ask me like for advice on like which is the best mesh or wireless network. And I'm like, if you work from home, just spend the money and get a wired network put in. It changes your life. Like, if you got kids, like, they're downloading a game over the wireless, and it says like, even if you have good wireless, it's like, oh, it'll be 10 minutes, and they plug in, it's like, oh, 20 seconds. And plus you get the backhaul, right, for your mesh devices. But I'm a huge proponent of wired networks as well. That's my big thing lately is evangelizing that. I love it.
I would absolutely agree. The best Wi-Fi is a Cat 6e cable.
It's unbelievable.
All right. Well, what about on these devices, the temptation around accounts and maybe sharing some of them across devices? Because, I mean, it's already a pain, even with a password manager, to have so many different SaaS accounts now that you have to be logged into. And I mean, I think there's tremendous pressure to say, you know what, I'm going to use the same creds for the light bulb in the washing machine. Should you?
Well, it matters how else you're configured, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so if you have it segmented and it's your washing machine, your light bulbs, and all that stuff, right? And it's not going to ever touch your work, right? That's a little bit different. Although always you think about it, if you think about all the IoT stuff in your house, like to me the biggest risk is probably your thermostat. Because imagine someone turning off your heat, and the first day you leave for a trip for the wintertime, you come home to frozen pipes, right? So just kind of think about the risk to the different things. But my thing with anything, it's always risk-based. And yes, it would be great if everyone used a separate account and password for everything. But at minimum, make sure you're doing that for the stuff that matters.
Yeah, but, I look at the IoT things, and specifically with that, you mentioned, some malicious type activity there, cranking the thermostat up or down or something of that nature. But, if somebody has access to a lot of your IoT devices, that's probably a significant privacy threat there as well. Just knowing which lights you have on and when, probably tells somebody a lot about your lifestyle and what hours you keep and all those kinds of things. And maybe, maybe that's important to you. Maybe it's not. I really worry too, just in general with, we see these breaches all the time. And I guess what bothers me about most of these IoT things and what I would kind of, caution all the gadget gurus out there who, love the tech toys is, that they all phone home. Because very rarely does anybody make any of the stuff that's truly standalone anymore. And there are technical reasons for why it's just easier so that the phone app works over the internet instead of directly via Wi-Fi or whatever. But you're giving up a lot of privacy when you choose to use these things. And I think people should be more aware of it than they are.
I think sometimes it's not a matter of being aware, but it's a matter of if they care. I've had this conversation with a lot of family and friends, and I'd say 80% of my responses are, my data's already out on the internet. Who cares? Like, they've already got everything. And then my favorite one is, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not doing anything unscrupulous. That's on the, who else might be watching you conversation. But it's more of like just the data privacy of the debate on Androids versus iPhones type of stuff is like, well, Apple has, much higher security and, they don't sell to advertisers. And I think, dude,
yeah, but it's not, and I mean, people spend a lot of time going, oh, Google knows everything about your life, and Apple knows everything about your life. Fine, maybe so. I think we all kind of know that. We made that decision when we decided to use any of those products in the first place. But what I worry about is more people that aggregate these leaks. I mean, right now we see these giant password databases and stuff that get aggregated. And I think we're going to start to probably see various IoT vendors getting hacked and people aggregating those databases and selling those things on the dark web too. So, somebody isn't finding out which password was to some stupid website 7 months ago, but rather this person almost always goes on vacation this month every year. Gee. And when that stuff's on the dark web and the criminals start buying that, I think that could lead to some pretty severe trouble and some pretty serious consequences for some people.
Yeah, behavioral data. Go ahead.
It comes down to like what Skylar said, though, is that as long as if someone knows the risk and chooses to do it, that's the big piece. Like what I worry about more is somebody that doesn't understand that using this product could create this risk, right? If you know what the risk is and choose to do it anyway, there's a reason people skydive, right? It's as long as it's kind of informed. But I agree with you, although I just, people share their, travel pictures on social media all the time, right? Yeah. I mean, so there's a lot of ways people are I think, creating that. And honestly, I think if you wanted to, rob people's houses, it's a lot less effort just to, cruise Instagram and, see who's posting from, overseas, than it is to go out and pour over somebody's, light bulb use history and see, hey, this week the lights aren't going on. I bet they're traveling, right? I just think
that's just it. Right now, that's hard, but I'm almost surprised we haven't seen, one of these ransomware groups or somebody get the idea to try to steal some of that data and actually do the correlation and sell the resulting data set so that, for your zip code X, get a list of, everybody's working hours,
Jeff's out here giving people ideas.
That's right.
It's the same, right? It's the same when they were selling credit card numbers, right? I mean, they're worth more.
Right.
They're from a high net worth zip code.
And if they're aggregated and validated.
But I do feel, as I said, just from an effort standpoint, I mean, I just think it would be easier to say, oh, look, Alex is posting a bunch of pictures from Tokyo with his whole family. I bet his house is empty. Versus, I mean, my wife is in her office today, and so the door of my house has not opened since 7:15. So, you're going to extrapolate, oh, well, the door hasn't, opened since 7:15. I bet that house is empty. I'm with you. I think you're right, though. You can start to get the aggregation of data. And if you started to, what if at some point you could get somebody's purchase history and know when they're not home, right? And know which house has the best stuff. I don't know. I mean, it's all out there.
Yeah. What about some other things that people are probably doing and maybe not thinking about some of the risks associated with? I mean, obviously there's a lot of things like Prime, Netflix, all these various streaming services and stuff. I know a lot of families and friends share passwords regardless of what the terms of service agreements are there. Do you guys think there's any, other than maybe a little obvious privacy risk, you think there's any risk there from a personal security standpoint?
Password reuse, right? That's still the biggest threat.
Yeah, as long as it's not a password that you use anywhere else, as long as you, as the sharer of said password, are doing best practices and not reusing passwords across accounts, you're, like what we just said, you're kind of knowingly taking on the risk of providing a password to somebody else. So you are now at the risk of the security posture of that other person.
And people watching or listening are obviously interested in security, so maybe the answer would be different for our audience here. But if you were just to, go ask an average person, is your Netflix password the same as your banking password or your email password? You're going to get a lot of yeses, right? I think that piece too, I mean, it's aside from sharing your password and messing up the viewing history, I love nothing more than to kind of log in using my wife's Netflix and then watch a bunch of like Steven Seagal stuff. So it shows up in the recommendations. But aside from kind of that type of thing, I think that does come down to, if you're sharing your Netflix password and it's a password used other places, well, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, the only other things that I would, I guess, add to it that I had kind of thought of when I was looking at these topics was, again, if that's a service that's important to you, and you do share it, and that other person decides to do something stupid one day, like share it with some more people or stuff, you could find yourself losing access, or somebody else could change the password, or, so again, that may be something worth considering before you go down that route. I'm gonna leave the whole moral issues around piracy and stuff like that aside here, and let everybody, kind of
Good, Jeff. That's
have
good.
their own feelings
Leave
there.
piracy
But
out of this.
yeah, aye, matey.
Arr.
Well, I think we beat some of those topics to death. Alex, you want to tell us some things that have maybe changed in compliance this year?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I'll kind of start off with a kind of a plug for some of our blogs that are out there. So, we have a full kind of advisory and maturity and compliance teams that work across all different kinds of frameworks and standards. I was actually just at an ISC Squared meeting last night where Steph Saunders presented on the NIST CSF 2.0. But Chris Cameo has been putting out a ton of information through blogs about CMMC and PCI and all the different standards out there. But from a compliance standpoint, obviously continue to change. Two of the bigger things kind of recently, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework coming out with version 2.0. I don't want to bore everyone to death, but I get pretty excited about these frameworks, especially the CSF. And I would say, when they went to that 2.0, I felt like like dancing like Steve Ballmer, right? What's that famous video, right? But I think just seeing these frameworks continue to grow and be more applicable and risk-based and more accessible to more organizations is a great thing. CSF, moving towards having a governance function, which is obviously so important, right? So why do you kind of do what you do? PCI, continuing to kind of grow and expand, a number of things there, looking at, more risk-based and, new authentication and, password improvements, things like that, continue to grow. And then the other thing is, privacy just continues to be a topic. It's interesting when you look at, cybersecurity versus information security versus privacy, and it all kind of starts to, where it blends together, right? If the world's just made up of Venn diagrams. But so much of it is so related, and privacy is obviously a huge topic. And then one other thing I always like to throw out there with compliance is when people think about compliance, they think a lot about, standards and frameworks. But one thing they don't oftentimes think about or kind of put in the compliance bucket is contractual compliance. And so a lot of companies, the things that they do, a lot of them they do for contractual compliance. And I think that, it's sometimes, compliance gets a bad name in the InfoSec world, but it really does drive a lot of organizations to do things that they should be doing. So I think it's a net positive overall.
Okay, next time you give a presentation, though, Alex, I need you to walk out on the stage pumping your fist saying auditors, auditors, auditors.
I'll happily do it. So here's the other thing I'll tell you just about compliance and GRC in general is what's one of the most common things we get asked about? It's, how can I get into information security, right? But what's the most common genre, right? How can I be a pen tester? Pen testing is great. As you know, some of my best friends are pen testers. But from a career standpoint, right, I think that GRC and compliance, it's going to continue to grow. We're not going to get less and fewer regulations. I always like to joke that, GRC is kind of like the dermatology of information security. And the reason being is, right, is think about it, like dermatology is one of the most, popular specialties for med students. The reason being is that they do procedures, right, which is where the money is in medicine. But it's more so is that they have pretty regular hours. I've had a lot more surgeries in my life than I wish I have, but they're always at like 5 a.m, right? So if you're a surgeon, you're rolling in there at 4 a.m. You might do very well and have a great job, but but dermatology getting called in at 2 a.m. And things like that. So I like to think GRC is kind of like that. I always joke with the incident responders here calling on Thanksgiving morning because there's an emergency where we need a policy, right, where somebody may be breached on, right? So I'm a big proponent of GRC careers and advisory careers. It's a great spot. Sorry to get off topic, but how excited I get about that.
So that's good stuff. Probably good advice for a lot of people.
And reach out to me if you ever want to talk about it. Anybody watching?
Awesome. Well, how about, let's see, Skylar, anything else we want to cover?
I would say I saw that we had a note about talking about the AI generated content and spams and stuff. And I want to combine that with like phone scams too. So I was on one of our local news stations a year or two ago about a phone scam, but starts as a physical mail scam. So we had recently moved into a new neighborhood and we got a postcard and it was like, hey, sorry we missed you. We tried to give you a housewarming gift. Call this number and use this code. And, the number was in my area code. When I called it, though, I looked at my phone and it had already rerouted to an out-of-state number. I was like, okay, well, that's already pretty suspicious. So I hung up. I didn't really do anything. looked up the number that it routed to and found out that it was already part of a news story from 4 years prior for a phone scam. And doing some research found that like the code that they give you is an authorization to use your data that they may have. So by just saying like yes or no, if it's recorded, they can use that as whatever authorization they're trying to get out of you. So it's a tactic to try and just get you to say prompts. So it's a phone scam effectively. And then I'm seeing a lot more of that with AI content, or I think it started out being called deepfake content of spoofing people's voices or just using a different voice to sound official and coming up with scenarios that would get people to give their information over the phone. So, Alex, have you seen anything recently around that?
So absolutely. So not on both the consumer level and the corporate level. AI, as much as everybody talks about it, is being used to craft better messages. Right. It is being used for the voice cloning. Really. I was thinking about with kind of scams and things like that. The themes have been the same for a long time. It's just the kind of the pretext and some of the methods around those scams change. But you think about grandparent scams, right? So the kind of the old scam where somebody calls you around spring break and says, "Hey, your kid's been kidnapped in Mexico," and you just wire money. That's been around for decades. But now it'll be the actual voice, right? And they're pretty convincing. We see a lot of the things that are kind of the hallmark of a scam. Whether it's kind of grammar or accents, even sometimes those can be kind of the ability to recognize that. With AI, it's much tougher. But no, what's fascinating is the number of scams out there, and it just continues to grow. And a lot of the old-fashioned stuff, kind of as an aside, it's more an anecdote than data, but seeing more stories on the news about people where the scam starts online and it ends with something physical. An example that about 6 months ago, someone here was scammed online. They actually showed up at a Starbucks that I go to sometimes, with a shoebox of money with like $50,000 to give it to the scammer. So there is a lot more of that kind of thing, which I think is always a little bit surprising, because you think there's a much higher risk of getting caught. But no, scams are really nonstop. And also when you look at the breach data, right? I mean, how are people getting into companies, right? It's a lot of the same stuff. So that's why the kind of what's great is, I guess that was foreshadowing at the start, talking about cybersecurity training. That's why I think it's so important that things that are going to get you in your personal life are also going to get your organization.
So are we going to start seeing more cybersecurity trainings dive more into AI recognition, like how to spot AI content?
Sure, kind of given that, I mean, it's given that those are tend to follow some of the hot topics. But again, the other thing is when you look at kind of cybersecurity training, it really runs the gamut, right? From organizations that are kind of always have it at the forefront, they have swag, they're constantly putting out information. One thing that's really effective is kind of sending out information whenever there's a new incident. I don't mean at the organization, but it's like, hey, this just happened to a company in the same vertical we're in. Here's the story of how it happened. You send out to everybody. And others that, it's kind of a once a year check the box thing. So I think like anything else in information security or security, you really see a range.
Speaking of deep fakes, before we go, I just saw, and it's something I wanted to check out, but I haven't had a chance to yet. It looks like OpenAI has released a new application that's going to let you deepfake your friends, supposedly with their consent. Anybody think those videos are going to stay restricted to the app?
Of course they will.
Anyone asking people that work in IT, which is like the prank central.
Yeah, I'm just going to put this one out there. Giving anyone permission to just use your likeness, that's probably eventually not going to end well. So, sorry,
Big red flag on
OpenAI.
the,
I'm going to tell people to stay away from this one.
And honestly, cut this out if you don't find it interesting. But just from an AI perspective, I found myself getting annoyed by it, like these AI customer service agents. But I will tell you, I called to make a dental appointment. I had to get a crown and a root canal. And the advice that I will give you is if you're over 40 years old, never eat popcorn. because it seems like popcorn leads to a lot of cracked teeth. That was in my case, so whatever. Like a $3 bag of popcorn ended up costing me like $3,000. Unnecessary backstory. But I called my dentist, and I've been going to the same dentist for 15 years. I know them, they know me, but it was during the lunch break, so nobody was there to take my call. And so of course the AI assistant picks up, and I'm so annoyed, right? It's asking me all these questions, when I want my appointment, this and that. And at the end, it very politely tells me that I have an appointment in 3 days and what time, and they'll see me then. And I'm like, I was so annoyed, but it did exactly what I wanted, and that was so easy. So I don't know, maybe our new overlords are going to be great.
You are so frustratingly helpful.
I know, right? I was like, I wanted to be so angry.
I am mad at how awesome this is.
Darn you, useful tool.
Yeah, you dang robots.
All right, well, I do want to thank Alex for joining us today, and I want to thank all of you for listening and watching. Security Noise is a production of TrustedSec LLC. If your organization have any questions or needs for information security, go to www.trustedsec.com. We'll see you next time.